I've backed off this year a bit, in that we lost 2 years of COVID with a lot of the business. And on April 1st, when they opened the province up, almost all of my clients, 201, wanted to catch up of 2 years of lost revenue. So John, for example, I adore the man, but the one concert now turns into a 5-year plan, 2 cities, 6 concerts, Christmas. And I said, no, I can't do that anymore. I lost 3 European trips. So I've booked all 3, and I'm going to be in about 15 countries over the next 16 months traveling. And the last thing I want to be doing is working as I'm floating down the Giro on a river cruise.
Yeah. You'd rather be there doing that. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, there's something to be said for working remotely, but still.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I did that for a long time. And my wife kind of gives me the eye, and I say, I get it. So I want to catch up. I'm 70. I'll be 72 later this year. So you've got to start to pay attention to your health and your time on this earth. And it's time to pull it back a bit after 52 years.
This is episode 1 of Kevin Talks Tech, a conversation with Marty Forbes. In this episode of Kevin Talks Tech, I'll give you a sense of what to expect in regards to this podcast and future episodes. I'll cover some of the latest tech news stories and give my take on them. Some of these stories include the new law in Ontario that forces employers to create a policy regarding work-related messages after hours. And Pew Research says a quarter of Americans now get their news from podcasts. And how Apple and Google are introducing new emergency dialer and accessibility features. Then I'll have a conversation with Marty Forbes, who recently retired after 52 years in the radio industry in different roles, and until recently operated a consulting business called RadioWise, helping radio stations transition to digital marketing. Hello, welcome. My name is Kevin. This podcast complements my website, KevinCanFixIt.ca, which launched this month in June of 2022. There, you can find free and paid videos and blog posts that help you better understand and use your technology. This is so you can avoid paying high hourly rates or waiting days for your computer to be fixed somewhere else. For example, you will find free blog posts and videos on topics such as how to add in an emergency contact to your iPhone lock screen, how to access sleep and hibernation settings in Windows 10, and how to change default programs in Windows 10. Kevin Talks Tech consists of 3 parts. First, we'll look at the latest tech news and I'll provide my thoughts on why I think you should care. Secondly, I'll have a conversation with a guest. In this episode, I'll talk to Marty Forbes a little bit later. In general, we'll talk about their home-based businesses, or they may simply be working from home, and how they got started. Then, I'll ask them what they hate and love about technology, and if we have time, I'll answer a tech-related question if they have one. Third, I'll answer a couple of listener or member technology-related questions. Don't worry about scrambling to write everything down. You'll find show notes, links, and even a transcript for each episode over at KevinTalksTech.ca. All right, let's get started. Here's the latest tech news. According to CTV, this story will make you want to turn off your notifications and silence your phone. In a win for work-life balance, a new law is now in effect in the province of Ontario that gives employees the right to ignore work messages and calls after hours and requires employers with 24 or more employees to have a written policy in place. This can include emails, telephone calls, video calls, and other messages. You can find the link to this story and the others in the show notes. I think this is really important, and I hate to be a cynic, but I do consider myself a realist. I think this is really important because unfortunately, history seems to indicate that laws and guidelines and rules need to be put in place by government in order for them to be implemented in some way, shape, or form by employers. A lot of employers, not all, but many, are very reluctant to make changes because they're not sure how it'll affect their bottom line or their business. But they find ways when laws are in place and there are consequences for not following those laws, fines, etc. That being said, this is a nuanced issue. Not everybody works 9 to 5, frankly. We all know that. I have my history in the IT industry, doing on-site and remote work, for example, meant I was dealing with a lot of technology that clients needed, and certain things would fail, regardless of the hour or of the day and night. So I had to check my messages, quickly, email, text messages, phone calls, and make sure that if something was happening, and if it was urgent, it was addressed. But if it wasn't urgent, then, you go back to your family, you go back to your life outside of work, and you can address it the next day or the next work day, and it's not an issue. But that being said, there, of course, are many employers who take advantage of employees. And that's what I believe this law is for, at least in Ontario. So this gives employees the freedom, the right to not respond to non-urgent messages. I'm assuming that makes sense to me, at least, how this would work. And then they can go about their lives, come back to it the next day, what have you. And that gives employees the freedom, the right to ignore those messages without fear of repercussions from their employers. Because again, presumably, it'll be written into the law, and those rules must be followed. According to Pew Research, nearly a quarter of Americans now get their news from podcasts. Do you? I must admit to rarely watching the news anymore. I find it only tells part of the story. I get my news from reputable outlets online and through following reputable media, journalists, experts on Twitter, and yes, podcasts. I really dislike how traditional media tends to cram everything into a few minutes or less for each story. So I read articles online, listen to podcasts that go into more depth with interviews that can last anywhere from 15 minutes to more than an hour. And I enjoy reading Twitter, yes, I said Twitter, threads from experts, journalists, and even by those affected. I'm not throwing shade toward traditional media. It has its place. But with the internet and the technology that we have nowadays, it's important to seek out that information to get more information about what's happening about a situation or a news story. According to The Verge, Google has brought the emergency dialer feature to Pixel phones. I think this is fantastic. I have an iPhone for personal use and a Pixel 6 for business, though I don't use it for phone calls. I have enabled the emergency contact feature on my iPhone lock screen, and you can even enable your medical ID information to be displayed on your lock screen. And you can call emergency services from your lock screen. I happen to cover this in a free video and blog post at KevinTalksTech.ca. It's comforting to know Pixel phones have similar features, and they do, and this just adds to that. And it doesn't just apply to when you're in an emergency. You can hand the phone to a friend or someone else that you trust, and that way they won't have access to everything on your phone simply when they just want to make a call. You're just giving them the ability to do that. According to TechCrunch and others, Microsoft has enabled a feature in Windows 11 that uses AI that will always make it look like you're looking into the camera, the webcam, during video calls, and honestly, it's poorly done and creepy. I would also argue it's unnecessary. No one's expecting you, no one, to make eye contact every second you're in a conversation, just like in real life. Please don't use this feature. At the very least, people can tell, and it's distracting. This next story nearly brought tears to my eyes, but happy tears. According to 9to5Mac and others, Apple has unveiled an incredibly useful new accessibility feature on your iPhone. The AI can do things like read signs and text on business doors, for example, provide live captioning on what you're watching on your iPhone, and more. This kind of thing makes me absolutely love technology and how it can help people. According to Ars Technica and others, after significant backlash from users, Google is backtracking on shutting down its long free legacy G Suite offerings. So if you're not a business, and you're not using those services with a domain, such as yourbusinessname.com or whatever, and you're a regular user, nothing will change for you. If you do have a domain, you'll have to start paying, or you will no longer have access to those Google services. This has been controversial, but I think the issue is more so about how Google has communicated what's happening, not so much that they want to charge for it. In fact, the rate that they want to charge is quite reasonable if you are running a business. At the end of the day, though, it's human nature. When we get something for free, we want that to continue to be free, and we take issue when it's not. Though I'm not really sure that should always be the case. Google is charging a reasonable amount of money for the services that they're offering. Yes, they're a $1 trillion company. but they're also a business, and they have they're offering these services that have value. So I think they're being very reasonable in how they're approaching this. It's just that the communication and how they've kind of gone back and forth, and again, haven't been clear. That's been the real issue, and that's confused and frustrated people. So that is what I think the story is about. There have also been rumors and speculation that Google has been threatening to take away user emails, so people can't access those when they have years going back of many emails, and that's simply not the case. Google has made it clear now that they will not be taking away email. So you won't have access to it, at least on a business basis, if you're not paying for it. But the data behind the sign up, basically the sign in, I should say, will remain until you decide to log back in and pay for it again. So that won't be an issue. Okay, let's go on to the next story here. Tim Hortons is facing scrutiny over their tracking of customers via their app. This is actually a really big deal because Tim Hortons really screwed up here. They were collecting information about, and they've stopped now, but they were collecting information about the user's location, the customer location, no matter where they went. They were taking advantage of your phone's capabilities if you have their app installed. So they would know everywhere you went, and they were tracking information and collecting it. In addition, it was being managed by a company in the U.S., in which they had a very loose contract in terms of how that data was being used or even sold. So they've decided to, after significant backlash, I might add, they had decided to stop those practices and no longer collect identifiable information. But honestly, when stuff like this happens, I tend not to really trust the companies anymore. So if I had the app on my phone, I'd be removing it, and I suggest you do that as well. I can't trust companies after they do stuff like this. Doesn't mean it'll stop people from going to Tim Hortons, but I certainly don't think that people should be using the app to send a strong message to Tim Hortons that this is unacceptable. Is there a tech news story you think I should cover? Please email me at news@KevinTalksTech.ca. You can also find that in the show notes. All right, so as I mentioned, this episode's guest is Marty Forbes. Marty has spent his entire life in media, and in particular, radio. He has spent over 52 years as a program director or vice president or general manager of top radio stations in Vancouver, Edmonton, and Calgary. He's been semi-retired since 2008 and operating a consulting company called RadioWise, specializing in media, social media, and marketing, and helping those companies transition their efforts to the online realm. Marty has also done a great deal of work in public service, including with the Jerry Forbes Center, Santa's Anonymous, the Edmonton Singing Christmas Tree, Crescendo, and the John Cameron Changing Lives Foundation. He was also proudly awarded the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal in their community service category. In this conversation, he tells us a little bit about how he got started, his career path through the years in radio, his family legacy, and his time operating RadioWise. We also talk about what he hates or at least dislikes about technology, what he loves about technology, and I answer his tech-related question. Without further ado, let's go to that conversation. Hello, Marty. Thank you so much for joining me on Kevin Talks Tech. I really appreciate it.
I'm honored to be here, and it's great to see you again.
Yes, it's been far too long. Far too long. You're looking good, though. And I hear you're doing well.
I am. I'm actually kind of having the time of my life. I retired from radio 14 years ago and opened up RadioWise Inc. that you see behind me here. And it was really to react to what was going on in the change of media from traditional into digital, and spent 10 years down in Phoenix, really hanging out with some of the great innovative thinkers in the digital world, and started going to just some absolutely great conventions, private conventions with, the Netflixes and EAs and Pandoras and stuff like that, and had a real eye opener to say, hey, the world is changing. It's changing quickly, and I better ramp up and stay relevant as best I can.
Tell me, how did you get your start, and what led you to create RadioWise?
Well, I'd spent literally almost 4 decades in radio, running radio stations in really, really big markets. And they sold the company, and I got a nice thank you, and bought a place in Phoenix and went down by myself. I'm married with a couple of kids, and I took 90 days to say, okay, I'm only 58. What can I do to enjoy the rest of my life, and more so stay relevant? And started to watch what was going on with traditional media declining and digital media inclining, and platforms that just came out of nowhere that all of a sudden, boy, I better ramp up. And then started to see that I had better work with some companies to understand on how you make both of these elements work. What traditional advertising could and should do with marketing, but more so how innovative and creative can you be with digital, and more so really target demographics. Why are you on certain platforms? How do you use them? Do you use pictures? Do you use audio? Database marketing, which is huge these days. And it was quite amazing, I guess, with my radio background, just a lot of calls that I got, and just got some amazing projects to work with, and kind of focus more on companies that gave back. So, for example, I've been doing all of John Cameron in Edmonton media for his Edmonton Singing Christmas Tree and Crescendo, which is on a massive concert series that has been going on here for over a dozen years. And we've raised $1 million given back to either Christmas charities, children's charity. I know, very rewarding. And everything kind of spun off of that until this day, where I'm actually working for a company. They released their figures this week. It's a $12 billion company. It's an NDA. Unfortunately, I can't talk about who they are. But I sit and monitor everything in their category around the world for them, and each weekend present them with a document that they don't have to spend any time on digital media. I do it all for them. So they'll click through and find out, oh, that sounds interesting, and they'll have it in their lap every single week. So it's allowing me to learn, about their product and what's going on in the province of Alberta, and things are rosy. There's some really, really good things happening. So that's been a very fun process over this little while. I've backed off this year a bit, in that we lost 2 years of COVID with a lot of the business. And on April 1st, when they opened the province up, almost all of my clients, 201, wanted to catch up of 2 years of lost revenue. So John, for example, I adore the man, but the one concert now turns into a 5-year plan, 2 cities, 6 concerts, Christmas. And I said, no, I can't do that anymore. I lost 3 European trips. So I booked all 3, and I'm going to be in about 15 countries over the next 16 months traveling. And the last thing I want to be doing is working as I'm floating down the Giro on a river cruise.
Yeah. You'd rather be there doing that. That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, there's something to be said for working remotely, but still.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I did that for a long time, and my wife kind of gives me the eye, and I say, I get it. So I want to catch up. I'm 70. I'll be 72 later this year. So you've got to start to pay attention to your health and your time on this earth, and it's time to pull it back a bit after 52 years.
Indeed. Yeah. And that's a good lesson that many people could learn earlier in life too, I might add.
Yeah. Well, travel is a gift. If you want to understand what's going on in the world, you've got to get out of your own backyard. And I spent a lot of time in communist countries this 2 years ago, and boy, you want an eye opener. And if people complain about life here, I'll take you over there and introduce you to some people.
That's right. We won't dive into politics here, but I hear you.
No, sir.
So I want to get into touch on one quick thing here. You kind of created a bullet point for me that I wanted to address. So you have a family history in radio. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, my dad started 630 Ched here in Edmonton in 1955. If you're aware of the city, he also started Santa's Anonymous. And there's actually 4 city streets named after him up in Riverbend, as well as a $20 million building called the Jerry Forbes Center for Community Spirit. And what it is 24 charities operating under one roof, including Santa's Anonymous, a stunning building. And my brother Jerry was a morning man in Calgary, Hall of Fame, and brother Gord was sales in Vancouver. Actually started out with David Foster and Tommy Banks here producing records, and he ended up with the Vancouver Canucks and then a worldwide software company that is cloud-based. So if somebody buys a Vancouver Canucks mug in London, England, it pops up on this screen. And so we used to joke saying we never had Christmas, we had conventions.
Right on. All right. So what do you hate about technology? We'll switch gears for a second. What do you hate about technology, or dislike rather, about technology, and why?
That's a great question. You know, I've always been in the corner office. I was either a program director or a general manager. So I was fortunate enough to always have people do things for me. So I've worked with some of the finest engineers in the world. And, you know, so I'm not as up to date as you would be if something goes wrong. So I rely solely on my equipment to do my work. And as PCs evolved into the Mac world, the biggest frustration I have is constantly doing work on one platform, sending it out, and somebody says, well, no, I'm on Mac, or no, I'm on such and such, and it doesn't look right. And they'll send it back and I go, it looked fine on mine when I sent it out here. So, and the other thing is these companies, they're all brilliant guys, but I don't know if they do enough hands-on testing to understand that you know, I spend so much time on this. The last thing I want to do is have to shut down and update my apps constantly and then relearn. I mean, I took the original Microsoft Excel course where everything was text-based. Good, that'll do that. And then they iconize everything. And now I've got to hit every single button to try to figure out what that is. And then they add all these options that I don't need. So I spend a great deal of time trying to learn software and learn all these changes, which in my world is a waste of time. You know, I used to call the engineer, or my secretary was spectacular, and say, Maggie, I'm going to do the base PowerPoint. I'm going to send it over to you to make it pretty. So that's kind of what I do is they're going to lose my mental direction and experience to me trying to figure out software and all the constant changes that go on.
Yeah, I got a bit of a quick story on that, if I may. So,
yeah.
What jumps to mind for me, as far as the compatibility is concerned, when I was taking the journalism program at Lethbridge College back 2007 to 2009, an issue that really stood out for me, because they were very serious about it, was you had to save documents in the .doc format, not docx, because that was the latest and greatest at the time. DOC, because the programs that the instructors were still were using at that time hadn't been upgraded yet.
Right.
And a lot of people actually hadn't upgraded yet. So they would you send them a docx file and they can't open it in their program, and they're like, whatever, we told you, and it's an automatic fail.
Correct.
Yeah. So yeah. I distinctly remember that.
Well, I have a Honda Goldwing. It's the most technically advanced motorcycle. It has a 200-page guide. And on a lot of the buttons, there are at least 3 to 4 minimum options on that button. So you are sitting there playing on this bike, trying to sync up, you know, your Apple CarPlay and your cell phone and whatever. And it's done in 3 or 4 different languages. And you pick this up as a guy like me going, no, I don't want to start the bike. I want to ride the bike. I'm not going to sit here and study a 200-page thing to get the tire pressure that also does the mileage, that also does the analytics. So they just don't do enough. And Mac is the best pretty well at simplifying most things. I mean, the undo button saved my life a number of times when I'm trying to do something, screw it up, and I screwed it, boom, hit a button and undo. But a lot of times now, these instructions are so complicated and so convoluted. And then, like you say, I don't need to know that. I need to hit the save button. That's all I care.
No, you're right. There's a lot of features in a lot of programs now, and it takes a lot of time and energy in some cases, depending on what you're doing, to learn all that and to know how to do what you want to do. So particularly when change happens, and sometimes it's change for the sake of it, I might add, where, like I say, it feels like, and again, I don't want to throw shade toward these companies either, but the idea that there's not enough hands-on happening, right? Like going through using the program as a regular user.
Absolutely. Totally
You
agree.
know, yeah, and every step of that, and every step of the way, I might add, to make it as simple and user friendly as possible. I mean, that sounds idealistic at this point, but it's the way it should be. Because I've dealt with many clients, businesses as well as residential customers, for issues just like that, and these people aren't tech savvy half the time, most of the time, and I'm fine with that. We all have our skills and our strong points, but there's a lot to learn and to grasp when it comes to understanding and using our computers, our technology. So when things change, or when there's a 200-page manual and there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, yeah.
Things like that. So
Yeah.
that's a big part of why, not to give myself a plug here, but that's a big part of the reason why I started my business, to help people in that way, so they're not so subjected to that.
It's a great idea, and it's needed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. What do you love about your technology, and why?
It kind of aligns with the way radio was in the early 70s, where it was all locally operated. So with digital, you start with a white palette. You assess what your clients are needing and what they require, what their support is like, and then you build a proper digital template for it. And and it could be a mix of TikTok, it can be a Facebook business site, it could be programmatic advertising. So there's no rule book that you have to sit down and say, do it exactly like this. So the creative work within digital, and all you need to do is dial into TikTok and watch some of the things that these kids, we call them, are making, and they're worldwide quality now. And that can all be done, from your laptop or from sometimes a cell phone or an iPad. So the creative aspect of what I do is really, really cool. You have to have a client who understands that concept as well. And it's why I stayed so long with John Cameron. He's on 0 platforms, so he trusts me 100%. And I say, okay, John, I'm going to sound like an alien here for a minute when I'm going to tell you what we're going to do.
I'm going to use that. I sound like an alien. Okay.
And he says, no, as long as you're right. I said, okay, well, we're getting out of wasting our money doing this, and we're going to be doing this, and we're going to own. My line is, nobody has more passion and knowledge for what we do than us. So why do we hand this stuff off to somebody who's never been to one of our shows, may have just moved into town, and every year there's a staff turnover at the agency, and I start all over again. It makes my job twice as hard. So we brought everything in internally. We do everything. We do all of our own writing. We use our own people. They're our ambassadors. We film everything. We distribute everything. And for the singing Christmas tree, when it shut down 2 years ago, we actually spent 0 marketing dollars and sold out 6 shows at the Jubilee for charity, all ourselves. So there's way more dollar efficiency to do it when you do it right. And you're not handing off to second and third parties to do everything. So it's very rewarding from start to finish to put together a plan, walk it in, show it up on the screen, and get the stamp of approval and move on. That's what I really like.
So you asked me, time to turn the tables. You asked me, what's the best antivirus available on the market these days?
Okay.
So I'll just answer your question straight up. ESET NOD32 antivirus, or Internet Security, as I think is the modern version of it. So I've used that for well over a decade. It feels like almost 15 years at this point, but certainly a very long time. Put it onto many client machines, and many of my own machines. Have recommended it for that long, and the reason is I've tried pretty much the rest. I started using computers, really getting into it around the 2000 mark, and started off with free because I was a kid, couldn't afford it. But yeah, I used Avast, AVG, the list goes on, and I just didn't find that they were very effective, if I can be honest. That was my experience. not trying to get sued here, but that was my experience. And then I tried Norton and McAfee, Bitdefender. Like I said, I've gone through the list, as well as encountered many systems of client computers that have had these different antivirus software. Some has more than one, which you should never do. There have been problems with almost every other antivirus that I've tried. Norton's still around, McAfee's still around, Bitdefender's still around. These companies are still around. There was one particular antivirus. I'll just say Bitdefender. This must have been 2008 at the time. I'm sure they've made good by now, but they introduced a bug in their software by accident, and that bug prevented Windows from booting.
Wow, that's a big bug.
It's a big bug. So I was working with a colleague at the time, and we ended up getting a few different calls about that. So from that day forward, I have never used Bitdefender. They may be fantastic in other ways, but when you do something like that, you burn me. Ended up finding ESET Nod 32 at the time through the podcast network that I've listened to, I want to say religiously, called This Week in Tech. In fact, they're still a sponsor, but that's not the reason that they mention it. It's lightweight. It just works. I'm not trying to do an ad for them, but I do have a video and blog post about this on my website when it launches on June 1st. But lightweight, it just works. You almost forget it's there. And I haven't had any infections on my computers or the computers I've installed it on, to the best of my knowledge, since I started using it. So it's affordable. It's based in Europe. I forget exactly where, but I really like them, and I do strongly recommend ESET. They have an antivirus, internet security, a couple of other products. They have, of course, network and server editions.
Good to know.
But that being said, I know to those listening, if finances are an issue, and I don't judge, Microsoft Defender, it comes with Windows 10, and that's built in, and it's free, and it works pretty well, quite well. I'm just, again, I've been using ESET so long, I'm kind of addicted to using that particular program, and I haven't had a problem with it. It also has more features, but the antivirus built into Windows is again Microsoft Defender. They might call it something different at Windows 11 now, but it works. It works quite well. The last point I'll make on that, and I do cover this in that video and blog post I mentioned, the best way to respond to the threats that we may encounter online when we use our computers. Having an antivirus is great, but we shouldn't rely on that like completely and entirely, because when you're surfing the internet, what have you, click on a link you shouldn't, open an email attachment you shouldn't, these kind of things that I'm sure many of us have heard of. When you click to say yes or allow or what have you, if you're not paying really close attention to what you're doing at each step, you're allowing that infection to enter your computer, whether you have an antivirus or not. And it could do some or a lot of damage, depending. It's a combination. It's having the antivirus so that it can catch and kill whatever it encounters. It's having that awareness to be conscious of what you click on, and making sure you go to reputable websites, these kind of a thing. So
Absolutely.
To keep that in mind, user behavior is the term, and that's just as important, if not more important, than the security software that you use. They work in combination.
Bingo.
So, Marty, what would you consider to be the hardest year of your business so far?
Well, I'm going to guess it's probably a relatively easy answer, in that COVID has disrupted so many things. Now, a lot of the businesses are 2 years behind in their revenue. They're 2 years behind in keeping up to date on their own industry. I think there's a huge paradigm shift going on out there just in the world that we're seeing of the way business is done. I think you can, the restaurants, for example, there are some that adapted perfectly and expanded, and other ones that just shut down. And I think that's kind of where we're at right now. The one thing, up until a couple of years ago, it was quite manageable for your kid to do your Facebook site, is what I used to run into quite a bit. And now with all the options out there, it just simply isn't. And when I sit back and check, especially some of the Facebook business sites, and there's no updated information on it, there's no contact, there's no map pinning on the thing. There's no way to contact, or if you look at them and see that they haven't updated anything for the last 2 years, I've got to go back in and resell them all on, listen, a hands-on display. Let me just show you a really, really good Facebook site. Are you using Boost? What's Boost? Okay. Are you using programmatic? What's that? So ramping up and starting all over again has been really, really hard, especially for companies that I know are fractured financially. They just, they're pulling back everywhere they possibly can. And a lot of digital is new wave thinking. So, there's not a lot of people that dip their toe in the ocean and go, okay, let's try this at this point. So the risk factor has really, really changed. So it's made it harder for me intellectually to go back in and say, listen, you're going to have to ramp up. You got to change your strategy. Everything we talked about 2 years ago is 100% out of date. And that adds a lot of time, friction, stress, and hours into what I do for a living.
So I have to ask, just to kind of to help end the conversation on a good note. What's been the best year of business so far?
You know what? I'm one of those guys that believe that today is the best day of my life. I have always been associated with really good companies, really good owners. And I get asked this question, what was the best radio station that you ever worked at? And I said, all of them. I just would not have worked at bad radio stations because I worked with, winners, innovators, and, it allowed me to push myself to stay current. I couldn't do what I'm doing now if I didn't really, really, work hard at keeping in touch with what's going on in the world, why people use products, what stations they listen to, which stations they don't listen to, and that kind of reason. So, I had a few hiccups in my career where I went to, a station that the culture wasn't the proper mix for me. But I've always been lucky enough that a week or two after I was sitting on the beach, I got a phone call saying, hey, Marty, would you like to go back to Edmonton and run 3 really, really good radio stations? And yes, sir, I would.
Wow.
Yes, sir, I would. So I'm just fortunate. I'm so fortunate in my life. I've traveled all over the world. I have some amazing friends. I have people that challenge me to be a good human being. I'm in touch with the community. I have a family that I adore, and they reward me with the type of people they are. So my answer is really simple. Today is the best day, and I think tomorrow will be even better.
Doesn't quite answer the question, but I do appreciate the answer. Is there one year though in your business that really stands out to you though?
Yeah, it would have to be the launch of the Bear and the properties here in Edmonton. There were 2 stations. They bought a third one. They bought Easy Rock, so we had to bring that in and run them. And the building is just vibrant. It's legendary. It's one of the most awarded properties in all of Canadian radio, and a lot of great people. You and I both, talk about Matt Cundall and the Sound Off podcast, and there are a number of people that Eric Samuels, who launched the Bear, is now a worldwide speaker, does intellectual magic, managerial stuff. He's been on Penn and Teller's show, and so just so fortunate to have launched something that has sustained and lasted all this time, and enjoyed doing that. So I think the Standard buying those properties and launching the sports station within the first week, I won't mention his name, but a competitor said they'll be playing polka music. Well, we're now at year 21 of the all polka station that is run by TSN, the largest sports broadcaster, one of them in Canada. So I'm pretty proud of what we accomplished in that building.
Did you say 21 years?
Yeah, amazing, eh?
Love the Bear. I'll never forget that building. Even I went to see it every opportunity I could, to be honest, even beyond the practicum that we talked about prior to this recording. I remember I've always been a kind of a weather nerd as well. So Josh let me hang out with him for a couple of hours, a couple of times. And hell of a building and great people.
it was a wonderful mixture of radio, TV, with two separate owners, but you would never know it because of the friendship in there. And the magic of digital and Facebook, we're all still friends. We're all still in touch with each other. And I've been gone long enough now that all of the kids that I hired now have their own kids, which is really rewarding to watch them growing up and see them, as successful parents and human beings. So that's added to the magic of it.
So from what I gather, retirement is next.
Right? It's time to shut it down and see the rest of the world. I've lost so many friends in the last 4 or 5 years, most of them younger than me. So it was a real eye opener to say, okay, let's get back traveling again. I got some amazing trips coming up, and
due to COVID or other factors, I have to ask.
It was all COVID. I do river cruises every year through Europe, and that was shut down. And I'm going in September to all of Italy, Hungary, Austria, Germany for Oktoberfest, then April, Portugal into the UK, and then back for the World Juniors again in Sweden. And we do side trips to Denmark, Norway, Finland, and we're going to finish up in Belgium and the Netherlands, seeing some of the war sites over there. So stay healthy, have some fun.
That's right. That is a retirement.
That's a good plan, isn't it?
That's a really good plan. Yeah, do that for the next maybe couple of decades or however much longer that you can, for sure. And I think you mentioned, was it Phoenix?
Yeah, we were in Phoenix at a condo down there until my youngest daughter had a baby, and I'm going, what am I doing down here missing him? So he's an absolute joy, and we spend at least 2 days a week with him. So we're just 15 minutes away.
I really do want to thank you for your time today, Marty. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for being legitimately the first guest on this podcast.
As I said, I'm deeply honored, and let's not wait so long to chat next time around. Kevin.
Absolutely not.
Good luck with everything.
Thank you. And one more quick thing, could I be amiss if I didn't say this? Where can people find you online? What do you want to plug?
My Twitter is probably the best, is MJ Forbes. And I have an Instagram, but it's more personal stuff. My Twitter, I really try to highlight business, marketing, and there's not a lot of fluff on it. So
a lot of fluff, he says. Yeah. Well, Twitter isn't what it used to be either. So all right. Thank you, Marty. I really do appreciate it. And you can look forward to downloading and listening to this podcast. I'm talking to you, Marty, and as well as the audience. You can share it in June. I haven't settled on a date yet. I have to edit it and so forth, but it'll be out in June.
I look forward to it. Thanks, buddy.
It was wonderful to talk with Marty Forbes. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did as well. I first connected with Marty on Twitter more than a decade ago, and through my business at the time, worked on his computer. And if I recall correctly, I did a system cleanup. Once again, you can connect with Marty on Twitter at MJForbes, MJForbes. Coming up in episode 2 of Kevin Talks Tech, I'll talk with Kim Seaver of albertaworker.ca. In episode 3, we'll hear from Danielle Klooster, who is my business coach, though she helps many others as well. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast, please head over to KevinTalksTech.ca and contact me, and I'll be in touch. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.